Okay, hello everybody and good afternoon Queensland. So we have a couple of announcements today following Cabinet. One is about flood recovery, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I also want to let everyone know that we're going to be extending our free RAT scheme. So the Health Minister will be able to talk about that a little bit later. But in relation to our COVID update, we've got 4,300 new cases. We don't have any deaths reported because it's been the weekend, so they'll come out tomorrow. We have 782 in hospital, so those numbers are coming down a little bit, but we won't be resting on those numbers at the moment because we are still expecting that peak at the end of the month. And we have 41 new influenza cases. So, of course, still, everyone, if you are feeling sick, stay at home. If you haven't had that booster, go and get that booster. I can't stress, especially to our seniors, go and get that booster. And, of course, we've got the ECA starting soon as well. So I strongly encourage people to think about wearing a mask, especially where they can't socially distance. So in relation to the free RATs that are available, you must hold one of these cards: a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, Low Income Healthcare Card, Pensioner Concession Card, Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Health Minister will give a few more details about that. But today I'm joined with the Deputy Premier, Major General Jake Ellwood, and of course Brendan Moon from the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. And we want to Major General Jake Ellwood actually came in and spoke to Cabinet about the report about the response to the big flooding event that occurred. And today we released the report into the summer's floods and the recovery and resilience plan detailing how we're going to be dealing with it. And I thank the Deputy Premier and everyone for their hard work on this. But of course there's some 39 local government areas that are reported on, and the Major General, I think, went to every one of those communities and has been out there speaking to a lot of people. So in the 6 days from the 22nd of February, 793 millimetres of rain fell in Brisbane. This was the highest 6-day rainfall ever, and tragically we lost 13 lives. More than 9,000 homes and businesses were damaged, and the estimate social and economic losses are around $7.7 billion. And the Major General will talk to you about some of his observations, but I think one observation that we all understand is that mental health does have a big impact on people, and especially when some of these people have been hit not once, not twice, but in some cases 3 times as well. It takes their toll, and that's why we announced one of the biggest resilient programs to actually build back better, and that gives people now the opportunity to either leave their house if they've been impacted severely, or they can get their home fixed up or raised. And the Deputy Premier will talk a little bit about that. And that was our $741 million Resilient Homes Fund. Now, in relation to homes, there was about 8,600 homes inundated, and 2/3 of those have either been repaired or work is underway. So that's a good outcome, but we still recognise that there are some people that aren't in their homes at the moment, and they're either in alternative accommodation or staying with friends or family. 4,250 people have registered to either have their properties bought back, raised, rebuilt, or otherwise mitigate the risks of a future flooding. And 443 have registered for the voluntary buyback scheme. So this is good. This is the first time we've been doing this. We're working with the councils, and there are already people being offered that, and the Deputy Premier will talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so I'll hand over to the Deputy Premier and then the Major General, and then we're happy to take some questions on this, and then we'll move to other topics. DP?
Thank you, Premier. From November last year to May this year, Queensland experienced a series of natural disasters, of course peaking with that 6 days of record rainfall. Homes were lost, 13 lives were lost. The economic impact was enormous, nearly $8 billion. And so we needed a recovery and resilience plan commensurate with the scale of the disaster season. And today we welcomed the report from Major General Ellwood that is commensurate with the scale of the disaster that we experienced. The plan embeds resilience in our recovery plan. We have billions of dollars allocated to implement this plan, as well as including $741 million to help households become more resilient. I want to thank the Major General and his team for their work, Brendan Moon and the Queensland Reconstruction Authority for their work. Queensland leads the world in disaster response and recovery and now resilience, and you will see that in this report. What you will also see is how well and deeply the Major General has engaged with flood-affected communities. Throughout the preparation of this response, the Major General would provide a weekly report to the Premier and I, and it included what he'd done, what progress there had been, but it also always included stories of people he had met and heard their stories. That is incredibly powerful because ultimately these disasters, there's an economic impact and there's an impact on homes, but they impact on people and families and Queenslanders. And you'll see deep in this report the experience of those who were affected by these disasters. We of course continue to work with them to implement, in particular, the Resilient Housing Fund. There are now 4,200 people who've applied to access that fund across the range of responses, including raising, retrofitting to make them more resilient, and in some cases buybacks, and the assessment process to determine which option is most appropriate and then discuss with homeowners which option they would like to pursue is progressing well. I might ask Major General Ellwood to talk to the report.
Thanks very much, Deputy Premier. So on the 8th of March, I assumed responsibilities as the State Recovery Co-ordinator for the South East Queensland floods, and obviously there have been several events since that time. I've visited all local government areas. I've visited around 270 different flood-affected sites, and I've spoken to hundreds of victims of the floods. If I were to characterise simply, which is very difficult to do and could be problematic, you have two areas of concern. For urban communities, inundation has absolutely been the issue at hand. For rural communities, it's actually been isolation and the impact of the rains in those areas. But the common thread for all communities has actually been the toll it's taken on people's mental health. It is significant. And I have seen many who have bounced back and are so resilient, so impressive. One that springs to mind is a cafe owner in Maryborough. She had bought her business in around about November of last year. She was inundated in January, inundated again in February, was back in business in March because she had a supportive family, community wrapped around her, and then the support from the government grant all made a difference. Very impressive, very resilient. But there are some out there who are still struggling. And I met an older man in Ipswich, and he had lived in this house for around 30 years, had been inundated several times. When I spoke to him on the 15th of March, he was sure he had this cracked, he was going to build back, he knew how he was going to do it. And then I went back in June, and it was a different story. He was very vulnerable, and he just didn't know what he was going to do. Now his house is now approved for a buyback, but he's not sure whether that's what he wants, because that's been his house and his family's house for 30 years. So it shows that none of this is simple, and it affects people. And I think that's the key. This whole thing is about people. It's about their safety. and it's about their security, and that should never be forgotten. The State Recovery and Resilience Plan, previously known as a State Recovery Plan, but we've added in resilience and it's been integrated within because that's essential in our view. It's been informed very much by the communities that we've spoken to. It's been informed by the councils. It's been informed by state. And it is, I think, what is important to note is it is in equal measure focused on recovery and to resilience. And the over $2 billion that have been committed between state and federal government, almost half of that is committed to resilience, and that's significant. Now, and it's also important because as the threat we face evolves in terms of magnitude and frequency, it's going to be vitally important that our response evolves. And I've got to say, Queensland is very impressive in that regard. In the last decade, they have faced just shy of 100 events, but they have learnt and they continue to learn, and that's very important. So I'd like to take this opportunity to commend state and federal governments for their focus on communities in their time of need, on council leadership for their great care and compassion, to the Queensland Government departments for their ongoing efforts, and there is still much to be done, to the Queensland Reconstruction Authority under the leadership of Brennan Moon, an amazing example who set the standard nationally and indeed internationally. I'd also like to say, commend the Queensland Police, the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, the Australian Defence Force, the volunteers, who all came together at that really important time at the very start, helping people to start to move forward and start to pick up the pieces of their lives. But I think, most importantly, I would also like to commend everyday Queenslanders. Their stoicism never ceases to amaze, and they are at their very best in the very worst of times, and we have seen that. We have seen that. I'll now hand over to Brendan.
Thank you, Major General. Brendan Moon, the Chief Executive Officer of the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. As the Premier has touched on, 2021-22 has been a challenging year for all Queensland communities. But one of the things that strikes me from these particular events has been that we've had 4 events where we have had inundation to properties, and we cannot remember a time where this has happened previously. Also, 2/3 of the local government areas that have had impacts this year have experienced multiple impacts. And that goes to the importance of this plan. We know from our long years of experience that we get the best outcomes when local recovery plans are locally led and coordinated by the state. But we also know we shortchange our communities if we don't reduce disaster risk and also invest in their future resilience, and this plan speaks to that. So where are we now? As the Premier touched on, we had over 8,600 properties that were inundated. 2/3 of those have now either been repaired or works are underway. But we recognise we still have 2,000 properties that are uninhabitable at this point in time, and we are working to support those people as they continue their recovery, and this will be a long road. In terms of the Resilient Home Funds, right now we have over 3,000 home floor surveys underway, and this is important because this tells us the best option for those particular homeowners. It tells us where floodwaters have been and where they may go into the future, and that will drive the outcomes for these homeowners. We have started talking to those 400 homeowners that have indicated they wish to be part of the voluntary house buyback, and we expect the initial valuations of properties to commence in the next 3 weeks, especially in Brisbane and Ipswich, where the majority of those properties are. And then finally, in relation to the Resilient Homes Fund buyback, as the Major General touched on, there are still 600 people who are unsure of their next steps. And our approach now is very much supporting them, getting them to the right decision, one, to get them back into their home as quickly as possible, but also to support their decision to reduce flood risk into the future. Thank you.
We know, Have any been approved for buyback at this stage? Or are we not there yet?
In relation to the buyback, we have identified the most damaged and also the highest flood risk properties in a number of council areas. But the process from here really it's a voluntary process, and it relies on an independent valuation of the property to take place and that homeowner agreeing to the valuation of that property before they sell their house. This is a big decision for people, so we are not going to rush this.
What do you say to people still in limbo? They're still waiting for that money to come through for them to conduct those repairs to their house while their house just sits there? What do you say to those people still waiting?
We are saying do not wait for funds to be available to commence your recovery. And we have safety nets in place to support those people. If there are any issues in relation to temporary emergency accommodation, please ring the Community Recovery Hotline. But certainly we are working now as quickly as we possibly can through the 4,000 people that have actually identified they wish to be a part of this. And as I said earlier, the key driver are those floor height surveys. That 3,000 is underway now. That will then drive the delivery of those reports. That will allow builders to scope these works up and for works to commence.
So the 2,000 homes that are still uninhabitable, where are most of those homes and where are those people living?
So those people are in accommodation that has been provided by their friends, by their relatives, by members of the community, and we find this after every event. But also the state steps in to provide accommodation options to these most vulnerable and those most exposed. And we know that the Department of Communities have worked with over 700 families in this space, and are currently, all of those have been resolved and are working with 30 right now. But we recognise this will take a number of years to resolve this particular issue, just as it was our experience in 2011. And that support will be available to those families through the Department of Communities, through rental assistance programs that have all been announced as part of the recovery package.
Are most of those homes in storage?
Yes, they are.
Just in terms of the valuations, is there a cap on how much money
No.
is allocated?
Is it 740 million revenue now?
We are not going to flood risk all of the council areas and all of the catchments in Queensland. But this is important. This is an important first step. And what we did when we designed this program was we dealt with the most at risk and most damaged properties as a result of the events that we experienced here in southern Queensland. Back then, remember, we had over 8,000 properties that we identified that had been inundated, and that's formed the basis of this particular funding package.
Sorry, how much of that money has been spent of the 741?
So of this, we are still working through the actual home buyback scheme. So the voluntary home buyback is underway now, and we will need to come to an agreement in terms of what the value of those homes are before we actually outlay funds. The home assessment reports that are being delivered by Energy and Public Works will now inform builders' scopes of works, and when those works are completed by builders, by insurance companies, that's when the funds will start to roll.
So nothing's been paid out yet?
Correct, sorry?
So nothing's been paid out yet?
Not at this stage. But we understand there is a tension between getting money out the door as quickly as possible, but also supporting people come to really big decisions. For some of these people who have lived in these homes for decades, this is a massive decision for them about what is next for them. Do they stay or do they take the opportunity to go elsewhere? We're not going to rush it.
Is that a best and final offer when it comes to the valuation, or can they sort of go back to the table and sort of counter offer?
As part of the process, we invite homeowners to seek their own valuation, as well as there is an independent valuation provided to them. Yes, it's a voluntary program.
Given all the problems with construction costs, how long does this typically take?
As I pointed out earlier, this will be a long road. Our experience in 2011, it took us 2 years to get back, for people to get back in their homes. And there were some 20,000 homes that were either inundated or impacted by Tropical Cyclone Yasi in the north. But you are correct, it's a different environment now. But what we do have at this time is a $741 million package that we didn't have in 2011. Our task is to support those people who are out of their homes or are still affecting their recovery as quickly as we can.
There's in the media release here, there's a mention of a works and acquisitions under the fund to be completed by June 30, 2024. Is that some sort of like a hard deadline for QRA, or is that a state government sort of deadline there?
So under the joint Commonwealth and State disaster recovery funding arrangements, there is a 2-year timeline in which to deliver programs. But what we have found is that circumstances change during delivery, and we will have that negotiation obviously with local councils, also with the Commonwealth Government. So we will remain flexible to the needs of the individuals who have been flooded as a result of these events.
How might good shortages and also increased prices on children's food in the world market impact?
Look, these are considerations that we've taken into account in the design of this program. And I think when we start to get an understanding of what the scope of works and the costs associated with those works look like, we'll be in a better position to make the call on those.
Major General, can I ask you a question? There's something in the report about a current gap in knowledge in terms of creek systems. How important do you think it is to get better gauges on what happens with creek systems, particularly with the risk of flash flooding in urban areas?
Look, so there's several prongs to it now. The Inspector General for Emergency Management is doing their own inquiry or report at the moment, but it was clear to me going out to different communities that there was a feeling that there could have been more warning. There was, in some areas I feel that there are gauges required, in other areas I feel that the gauges maybe are older. And the thing is, we have an opportunity now, I think, with technology to actually improve what we have, to network it, so that we get a better picture. But there's also a lot of great work that is going on in terms of flood mapping. That, I think, is very important, so that people understand their risk and making sure that that is available to everyone.
Can I ask a COVID question?
Sorry?
COVID?
Yeah, sure.
Hospitalisations are coming down. Was this expected in the current modelling?
As I said, this is early numbers, and we still are expecting that peak at the end of this month. So I wouldn't get too excited by those decreases at this stage.
So you expect them to bounce back up between now and
We just don't know. We'll just have to see what the trend is over the next week.
Can you speak to Queensland Health suspending the scheduling of Category 3 outpatients appointments from today until October?
I might get the Health Minister to talk on that one. Yeah. Any other questions for me?
Premier, on the
Yeah.
flood report, what do you make of the current gap in knowledge in terms of understanding creek systems and then the risk of flash flooding? Do you think there should be better warning systems?
Well, we'll take, of course, very seriously these recommendations, and you'll see some of the recommendations there is about councils and their planning schemes. So I know the Deputy Premier will be speaking with the local government associations about that. It's really important to put as many measures in as possible. And I think I just want to come back to one point that Brendan touched on too. We haven't had a resilience package like this before, so this is the first of its kind in Queensland, and the Reconstruction Authority has moved very, very quickly. Now, we've also had, my understanding is the Reconstruction Authority down talking with New South Wales, giving them any advice as well. But we are really probably 2 steps ahead here when it comes to our recovery, due to the fact that we have dealt with so many natural disasters. And I do want to thank Major General Jake Ellwood for the incredible work that he has done as well in identifying those key issues about isolation, mental health, but also too seeing the resilience of the communities. And if you build back better and stronger, it does mean that people will be able to recover faster. That's a matter for her.
Premier, Grantham is cited as a successful case study
Yes.
in the report. There's a lot of towns in the city in Queensland that are built in floodplains and that could have a similar kind of solution applied to them. But how feasible is it to apply that more broadly? And if it's feasible, are there any other sort of towns or CBDs that you
Well, actually, that was one of the areas we went to. And I went there and looked at where the housing had been put up at Grantham. And I think now there's even some communication with people who have been impacted by flooding again, and they saw their neighbours that weren't impacted who moved. Everyone who moved to the new Grantham estate did not get impacted. So I think when people can see that, when you can visually see that there is an alternative, it gives people the opportunity, as the Major General said, to make that choice. This is about choice. This is not about, saying to people, this is what you must do. In many instances, I remember being in Goodna where families were saying to me personally, they had raised their families there and they did not want to leave. Now, having said that, I think the Reconstruction Authority works very closely with families as well to show them the alternatives so they can have that choice.
Freya, on the Olympics, will
Yes.
the police headquarters and the arrest court need to be bulldozed, and are things running, costs blowing out for that?
There is a whole lot of consultation that needs to happen before final decisions are made, but there will be a Brisbane Live arena in that vicinity. So we'll work through all of those issues, and when we are ready to make an announcement, we'll make an announcement.
What about the Gabba Premier? Will that cost blow out because of the changing the Bolton standards?
Look, once again too, this is a long way off, but we are very comfortable with the proposal for the Gabba that we put to the International Olympic Committee. And once again, there is a lot of consultation to happen, and when we have the final decisions, we will release those final decisions to the public. We've got 10 years to go.
Could be the footprint or the envelope of the Gabba is not big enough, is it?
Look, can I just say, the International Olympic Committee is very excited about the Gabba, so we are locked in there.
Health Minister?
Yep, sure. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Beth.
Has Queensland Health suspended the scheduling of Category 3 outpatient appointments from today until the end of October?
No, the Acting Chief Operating Officer has made contact with GPs talking about our surge plans if the peak keeps going up, and that being one of the options. Other options, of course, are securing more private hospital beds, so same sort of strategies that we've had in previous waves. It's not being initiated yet. Individual hospitals have suspended some of the lower category planned care, but they're doing that on a hospital HHS by HHS basis, not a statewide decision. So we're just making sure that we've got that line of communication with GPs if we do need to go down that track. As the Premier said, I mean, the modelling was that we would peak at the end of August. We're very pleased with what we're seeing so far over the last few days. We hope that that might be positive signs, that, we might be peaking earlier, but we'll just, see how it goes over the next few days. But it is promising. Only early this morning I got a briefing that for the first time in a while we've got a bit of a reprieve, and I think one ED was saying it's the first time they've walked onto the floor and no staff members been missing. But having said that, I've still got 2,000 staff furloughed today, so there are still those challenges. Can I just touch on the free rapid antigen tests as well? The Commonwealth earlier this year offered free rapid antigen tests that people could get from pharmacies who were concession card holders. That program ended yesterday. We have, through our forward planning, a lot of excess stock as far as our rapid antigen tests, and we want to make sure that those most vulnerable in the community, those concession card holders, can still access these rapid antigen tests, at least for the next 3 months while we see what happens with this wave and, of course, potentially future waves. So that means that concession card holders will now be able to get 5 free tests each month for the next 3 months. I asked people to go onto the Queensland Health website and they'll be able to see the list of sites. Now, if there are some hospitals listed there as sites you can get rapid antigen tests, but that's predominantly in the regions. So I do ask, if the hospital isn't listed, particularly in South East Queensland, don't go to our hospital seeking these free rapid antigen tests. Go to the health centres that are listed there. Some hospitals will be handing them out, but that will be as people come in for other reasons and might need a rat, then they might be provided a free one. But I ask that people don't just rock up to our big hospitals here in South East Queensland wanting the free tests, that there is a list of all the sites available across Queensland on our Queensland Health site, and I ask people to go on there. Of course, in addition to those tests will probably come in a box of 5, so it means people won't have to keep going back to get their 5 each month. They'll probably pick up a whole kit of 5 for the month, and then if they need more, they can come forward until the end of October. The other messages are still the same, of course, wearing masks indoors, getting vaccinated and staying home if you're sick. And particularly when we have the ECA coming up this weekend, we just remind people if you're unwell, stay away. But please go get vaccinated, and it's good to see some of those vaccination rates are coming up, particularly for the 4th booster, and taking that mask, and masks will be available for free at the ECA when people arrive.
All good? Thanks very much.
What do you make of Dr. Herrenfeld's call for mask mandates to return to Queensland?
Look, I've followed the advice, as has the Premier and the Government, all the way through this pandemic. We'll continue to follow the advice of the Chief Health Officers, and of course the Chief Health Officers consult with each other at AHPPC, but we all know what to do, we know what we can do. Everyone knows the benefits of masks, and they are available to everybody, so there's no reason why people shouldn't be using masks when they can without the need to mandate them.
Deputy Premier, with Karen Williams, Deputy Premier, with Karen Williams, now that she's been sentenced, is there anything else you're able to do in terms of she's going to return back to work, continue to be mayor? What else can you do?
No, the advice provided to me by my department is that now that the case has been concluded, there is no other appropriate ministerial action. What happens from here is up to her.